Welcome. We're very glad to have you here. I have with me Dr. Dunn, Dean of Graduate Education at Rensselaer, and I'm Chris Murray, the Director of Graduate Admissions. So we have 4 folks on the webinar so far and hope to have others, but we have students from Bowie State, Pepperdine, from our own RPI, and a student here from an Indian institution. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I said, please feel free to put information in the chat box, questions that you may have, and we'll go ahead and take those as we go along, and I'll incorporate them into today's session. So we're going to do this like an interview. I've got some preset questions for Dr. Dunn, and then we may elaborate on them and want to leave ample time in the end for your own Q&A. So thank you so much, Dr. Dunn, for helping us out. I know that you hold 2 PhDs, so wondering if you can tell us a little bit about why you pursued both of those PhDs.
Well, first let me welcome everyone who's watching us today. I'm glad to have you with us, and hope that you'll take some time and ask questions or will engage us a little bit later on. I'm going to answer the second part first, I think, where you asked how has it helped me? And the short version of the story is when I was a senior in high school, in English class or composition, we had to write an essay on what we wanted to do. And I don't know what moved me, but I decided that I wanted a PhD and I was going to teach in university. Mm-hmm. And that was a goal that I held for 10 years, and 10 years later I was teaching, and I wasn't here at Rensselaer, I was teaching another university. And I think I did it for 2 reasons. And what I always tell students here, and I tell faculty as well, is that a graduate degree is a test of independence. When you get a master's degree, it demonstrates that you can function independently in your discipline, and when you get a PhD, you can function independently in the process of creating new knowledge, in your field. So if you're the kind of person where you like, and I don't mean like to do things on your own, but you're not, you don't want to be encumbered by a current set of rules or guidelines or processes, then you should think about a graduate degree, and you should think about a PhD if you're really curious as well. So it's independence and curiosity are really 2 parts. Mm-hmm. Now, as for my background, I started out, well, the first degree was in computer science, and I was teaching in engineering, and then I started working in clinical drug studies. And I wound up in a situation working with drug companies and having to go testify before the FDA. And as a result, I needed some credentials in the medical field. Mm-hmm. And so I went back and got a PhD, and it was in clinical research. Mm-hmm. So that when I could go back to the FDA, they would actually, my story was believable to them because Sure. I had a clinical background. And the work actually led to some drugs being approved, which is very nice. And so for an engineer or a computer scientist to have an impact on healthcare was very gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm curious, I'm going to go off script for a minute, but do any other members of your family hold PhDs, or were you kind of out there when you had this goal?
No, none of them do.
So it really was a pretty...
Yeah. My parents, I guess I'm really first generation. I mean, my parents didn't go to school. My father, when he was in the war, he went to tech school on a GI Bill afterwards. And I can't think of anybody on either side that was that went. So it was just a goal. But I've always had that desire to be independent and curiosity, and so I didn't. This gave me a goal, but it wasn't, nothing else could hold me back.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. So obviously we have some undergraduate students today on the webinar, and I'm wondering, what should an undergraduate student who knows that they're interested in doctoral study, as today's folks do, be doing right now to prepare themselves to be admitted to graduate school?
I think one thing that's important for everybody would be to get to know faculty at your own school.
Mm-hmm.
Get involved with a research project, get involved, take independent studies, and demonstrate to your own faculty that you have this sense or drive for independence.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, you're going to need letters, you're going to need references, you need to get to know the faculty so they know you. For those of you that are that are with us, and ultimately by demonstrating that you can work independently and you got good letters from the faculty, I think that's the best thing you can do. Think about what field that you want to study. Think about where part of the country or what part of the world where you might want to study. And in my case, I was at the University of Maryland the first time, and the second time I was in Amsterdam. So I spent time in Europe as well, which I grew to love. But ultimately, getting to know the faculty, know the field, a little bit about the field, and get involved to make sure that you're studying something that's of interest is really important.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the relationship building is as important, or certainly very important, relative to the application for graduate admission. That the content knowledge is important, but building a network is equal.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Building that network is important.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. I know folks on today's webinar probably have questions about certain portions of the application and how we look at the application, but I want to focus on the GRE scores because it's often a point of worry for folks. Can you explain a little bit about how the scores are viewed here at Rensselaer, and then also how they might be viewed at other institutions and how that might differ?
Yeah, if I think about the other institutions I've been associated with, I don't think we operate really that much differently.
Okay.
At the level, if you're coming out of an undergraduate program and going right to a graduate program, there's really not too many measures that you can use of your ability to perform in a graduate program. For those of you that are watching us today, at Rensselaer, we focus on evaluating the likelihood of success. What do the faculty think in your background is going to indicate that you're going to succeed in the program? I see we have a question that we'll get to in a minute.
Okay.
Now, the GREs are only one measure of that. Right, that they're a measure of your cognitive ability, and because there are so many schools from which students come to Rensselaer or anybody else, you need a norm or you need a standard. So whether you're from the United States or whether you're from another part of the world, South America, or you're from India, or you're from the Far East, the GREs are normative measures of your cognitive ability. Now, there are other things that factor into it, and this is where reference letters play a role. Do the other faculty think that you're going to succeed? What have you demonstrated in the past that you're going to succeed in a master's or a PhD program? And so we've worked over the years to get the faculty to look at the whole student, but clearly here and in the other schools I've been, the GREs are a significant part, but not the only part of the student's background that we look at.
So sometimes we have questions of, how many times can I retake the GRE before it starts to look bad? Any thoughts there?
I think if you take it a second time, that's probably good. I would start to get concerned for somebody that took it a third time.
One of the things for folks who are on the webinar to think about, because I know we have some people who are juniors, is you have a summer between your junior and senior year. It's a great time to take the GRE. I mean, I took the GMAT, not the GRE, but my understanding of the GRE is a lot of the content there is content that students in their junior year are regularly involved in. In other words, while you do need to study very much for it, it's ready content for most of these students. So would that be something that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
When I'm asked, I'll always tell students no later than October of your senior year. So, summer would be a very good time.
One other thought on the GRE. So for students who, and I'm sure that we have some today in the webinar who say, well, I just don't test well. Are there other things that they can do, or if there's a certain area of their application that they feel less comfortable with? You mentioned recommendations. Are there any other additives or things that they could to use to show that they would be successful in grad school?
I think there are a couple of things. One is, research experience, and not just during the summer between your junior and senior, but during the academic year, maybe starting the year before. Many professional areas and their professional society conferences have unique opportunities for undergraduates to present their results. So having research experience, papers that you're published with your advisor, speaking at conferences, these are all excellent parts. We here use, it's not required, but something that we do allow students or recommend if they don't, test well or have poor cognitive scores, is the test called the PPI. It's the Personal Potential Index, and it's also published by ETS. So for any of you watching, if you go to the ETS website and look for PPI, you'll find information on the background. You'll find how to register and how to use it. It's a measure of the soft skills of a student. So if the GRE is cognitive test, so your verbal reasoning ability, your math skills, your analytical skills. The PPI is a measure of soft skills, your ability to work in a team, your ability to communicate, your knowledge, your creativity, and very often these are good or even better indicators of the likelihood of success.
Terrific.
If you're given an option, take it.
All right. And I have with me a couple of folks helping out today. One is Tracy Marizio, who's helping out remotely. And I'm going to ask her to put in the ETS website for the PPI. There's some great information there. So I see that we had a question about average time to a PhD. We're going to get to that a little bit later. And Jacob has a question. If the GRE is taken to be a measure of cognitive ability, how is the subject-specific GRE considered comparatively?
I'd say mastery of the material in that particular area. At Rensselaer, there aren't a lot of programs that use it. The only one that I can think of is physics. And they do look specifically for students that do score well, because that is an indicator of the mastery of the basic, physics material. So that means to them that you're well on track, to finish it on time.
Very good. So I know that, it can be frowned upon for PhD applicants to apply to a program at their home institution. In other words, the institution where they did their undergraduate degree. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. If I'm asked, what I always tell students is that if you're going to go into industry or industrial research and development or start your own business, it really doesn't matter. If you are thinking at all about going on to teach or an academic position, then it really does matter. Because in those situations, you're exposed to how different faculty think. We don't all think about the subjects the same way, and I have different explanations than my colleagues. But if you want to teach somewhere, you've got to give your own philosophy. And the only way you can form that is by taking input from a lot of different people. But if you're going to go into industry and that's your choice, it doesn't matter as much.
All right. Let's talk a little bit, because I know in Envisions we had a lot of questions about whether I should apply to an MS program out of the BS or directly to a PhD. What are the advantages and disadvantages of both of those paths?
Well, if you apply directly to an MS program, I would say most schools will not provide funding. Okay? So you're probably on your own, and that may or may not be prohibitive. The advantage of going to a direct PhD program is you're really stating your intentions right up front. And then you're in a situation where the university and the faculty are going to invest in you because you'll be around for 5 years or you'll be around for 6 years. I would say that, at least for a lot of students, get your master's on the way. The PhD, psychologically, it's just a nice milestone to have. And I know I did that, after 3 years and say, well, gee, I've completed the requirements, let me at least, get the degree. And then I know the end is much closer. The end is in sight. So funding is part of it, but I think also maybe a milestone, because a PhD program is a long or thing to undertake.
Follow-up question to that. Are there students, is there a certain profile of student that you think might be better for an MS as a first pass rather than going to a PhD?
Yeah, look, if you haven't done so well, if your GPA is not a 3.0, you might be close, but you're not exact. If your GRE scores are maybe not so great, but good, then I think you're more likely to get into a master's program.
Okay.
And then you'll have a chance to demonstrate your independence and your ability to perform scholarly work. And then from there, you have more references. You have a master's degree where you've probably done well, and you might have an easier time getting into a PhD program.
Okay. Let's take that question, actually, since we were talking about time to completion there. What is the average time roughly for a PhD in life sciences or here in Central?
I would say 5.5 years, maybe somewhere between 5 and 6 years, depending on the nature of the project.
And that's assuming coming from BS to PhD.
Right, yes, right. So post-baccalaureate, 6 years.
Okay, great. So let's think about now, the whole idea of working directly with an advisor. Because that's another point where students say, how do I choose this advisor? How do I find them? How do I have that conversation? How do I initiate that? What do you think about contacting faculty members during the admissions process? And again, we're assuming that the folks here are interested in the PhD. Sure.
I mean, I would encourage you to maybe get some recommendations from your advisor at your home school, reach out to them. I can tell you in my own case, I was working on an independent study project, and my advisor picked up the phone and called a colleague of his at University of Maryland and arranged for me to drive down and have an interview with him. So it was direct contact. Okay. Those were the days before email, so we don't have the opportunity to do today. But reaching out to faculty, I would encourage you to do. It is hard to read the enthusiasm or level of commitment, by email. You can say one thing and do another. So when you get to the institution, make sure that you meet with several faculty. Sometimes maybe undertake a project, an independent study with them. Okay. Some disciplines actually have a formal rotation process, and it's more often in the life sciences. And we had a question by someone in the life sciences, and very often in the life sciences, after or during the first year, students will rotate through 3 different labs, and then they'll select their favorite, and the faculty will select their favorite. It's a matching process. Here at Rensselaer, we often have seminars, workshops for students exactly on this topic. There's nothing more important than finding a relationship that'll work. You're going to be together for 5 years, maybe 6 years. And there are certain questions you should ask them. And there are questions you probably don't want to ask them. And there's certain kinds of faculty that you may want to work with, or certain faculty you don't want to work with. You probably don't want to work with a dean because they're very busy.
Yes, I can attest to that. Terrific. So in terms of it sounds like, given your experience and given some other things that you said, that again, that relationship development during the sophomore, freshman, it's hard as a freshman. I don't think we have any in the call. It's hard as a freshman to have the gumption to do that. But certainly as a sophomore, as you're beginning to do research, or as a junior, really that junior year being critical to develop those relationships so that somebody can tweet instead of picking up the phone, I suppose.
Right.
A little message to their colleague to say, you've got to check this kid out. I've worked with him for 2 semesters and he's great.
Still, sometimes we have faculty here who will get calls
Mm-hmm.
from their colleagues and say, do you have a spot? I have a great student here. And so, sometimes students get placed
Mm-hmm.
that way. Those direct recommendations can make all the difference, in the world.
So what about a student on the call who doesn't have or is having trouble building those relationships and really is going to end up doing some cold calling? Or maybe they just have an institution they're really interested in, they've tapped all the faculty members, nobody has a connection there. Any advice for that cold call, if you will?
Oh, I think, students still do that very frequently. I would keep the email short.
Okay.
Don't go into your whole life history. You might indicate your background, a few sentences, no more, summary about your background, your GPA, maybe your GRE scores. You could then have a couple of sentences about activities you've been involved with, research, projects. If you're in engineering, maybe a senior design project would be another one. And then express your interest in the area and that you'd like to learn a little bit more. You might express a desire to come and visit the campus. We have students come visit here. And start to strike up a conversation. Attach a resume if you have one. Make sure that it's in a good form. If you publish papers, attach copies. If you have a poster, attach the PowerPoint.
Okay.
But keep the body short.
Okay, so they don't look at a big tome.
Because
okay.
that'll be
It'll
the
throw
end.
them off.
Right.
Okay. And I would, I had a point to add to that, and now I have completely lost it. In terms of reaching out, in terms of reaching out to faculty, my only advice to add to that, which I thought was fantastic, would be know whether or not you're a competitive applicant for the school before you do that. In other words, do your research. So contact the admissions office, ask, what the profile is of an accepted student, what the school is looking for, where they place emphasis, so that going into that conversation, are you a super strong candidate to begin with, or are you a candidate that really is going to need to show some strengths in other areas outside of, your test scores and transcripts and so on. Again, know a little bit where you stand. All right, let's see what we have in terms of questions. All right, let's see. The weight given to the undergraduate publications during the graduate application selection.
Yeah. Sometimes, I'll be frank that graduate admissions is sometimes more of an art than a science. For the student, that asked, it's hard to give an exact number. It's hard to give an exact percentage. If your GPA is good and your GREs are good, you're in, right? If GPA is not so good or the GREs are not so good, then if the student has publications and the faculty notice it and the faculty think there's some merit, then they will, in their recommendation, say, look, this student has some publications that he demonstrates the likelihood of success. So the weight can vary. It could be from almost 0 to some very high percentage. It depends on the other factors.
Okay. Go back to our questions here. So thinking about the dissertation, how does one develop the topic? Where does that topic come from? Is it from the student? Is it from the advisor? And when does that normally occur in the program?
It's kind of the next question, so someone comes first. Normally there's 4 milestones. First year of a graduate program, you're taking courses. And after you've taken the basic courses, there's typically what the name changes from discipline to discipline, but it's a qualifying exam. We'll use as a general term. And so that's an examination. It's often, or for most cases, a written exam about your background, your content area, your mastery of the subject. And somebody asked earlier about GRE subject exams. So in physics here, if you do well enough in the GRE subject exam, you don't have to do the qualifiers. Okay, so if they're mastery. Then typically the student will begin his or her research. And you'll spend a year, maybe 2 years, developing in a topic of interest, kind of the research question that you're going to study. And typically you'll start by getting some basic experience, maybe reproducing an experience, working on something small, and then you'll prepare to ask something larger question. The next milestone would be forming your committee. Then the next milestone is your what's called the Candidacy Exam. So the Candidacy Exam is an oral exam, a presentation and question and answers about your preparation for conducting research on your own. So the faculty have to assess whether or not you're really ready to do research in a subject. If they all agree, as is most of the time the case because the advisor shouldn't let you get there unless you're ready, then you're off on your own doing research until the writing the dissertation and the defense. You know, and so that whole thing probably occurs over 5, 5.5, 6 year period. Could be longer depending on the subject. Now the question that you're asking was how to develop a topic. And you know, that varies from student to student. I say most of the time the topics come from the advisor, but that's not always the case. Doesn't have to be the case. You know, I'm thinking about, in my own experience, the first time it was a problem that was published in the literature. The second time I had a very specific goal because I was pursuing, you know, clinical work. But let's say most of the time it comes from the advisor. But that, we have had students here at Rensselaer who develop their own ideas. We actually, there's one that I know of, quite familiar with, a student who was going out to work at a research laboratory in the hopes of using that experience to develop a research topic. And then he'll come back and work with the faculty. And so that's very unique. So for the students watching, you're not stuck just you know working on somebody else's idea. You will have the opportunity in the right environment to work on something of interest.
So I'm taking that, backing up to the application stage and thinking that students here might be asking, well, how much information do I need to put in my statement of background goals about the specific type of research I want to pursue? You know, should I be specific? Should I mention particular possible dissertation topics? Should I go that? Or should I mention faculty members? What seems to work well?
I don't think it's necessary to mention topics at that point because you're still in an early stage. But mentioning areas of interest and specific faculty at the university is a good idea. Because then when the application is being reviewed, it might be directed toward that person, or clearly it'll be directed toward people in that area of interest. If I said I was interested in nanomaterials, my implication is not going to be read by someone in fluids dynamics, but it's going to be looked at by somebody in nanomaterials who can say, yeah, he or she is ready for research, he's likely to succeed. So I would give them some information because I think that can help the process of review.
Okay. This elusive thing called fit. Any ideas from your own experience or from students that you've seen, you know, ways or things to look for to figure out if there's fit between a student and an institution or a student and advisor?
Well, you know, there are so many factors that weigh into it. I always advise students to talk to other students because, frankly, that's when you get the real story. You do have to talk to the faculty and see if that relationship works. It doesn't always work, but you get the best indication by other students. If you can find out where, do other students who have gone through that lab publish, where they're going on to get jobs, are their goals, is that a goal that you have for yourself? You might wind up with an advisor whose students only go in industry and you're really looking for an academic position, and that's not going to help. But the students, so go visit the university and talk to the students, and that's probably the best advice. But building that relationship of that you develop with your advisor is the most important thing. And most of the time it works. Sometimes, it doesn't, but then, offices like mine or their counterparts can help you, guide through the process of making changes where it's necessary.
And I think that speaks a little bit to that guidance that your office provides. It can be challenging to go from an undergraduate degree where you sort of have a whole host of folks supporting you into, a PhD degree where you talked, at the beginning about independence. And so can you talk a little bit about the sort of services or how undergraduate students will be helped in making that transition?
Well, we're a little bit different, than a lot of schools. I think in many schools, if you go to their graduate school or Office of Graduate Education, whatever it might be called, this is a place where your records are kept and your thesis or your dissertations are reviewed. Here, we try to do a little bit more for the student. We have someone on the staff who will help you look for funding, help you try to find fellowships so that you can be supported through your program. Excuse me. We also, provide some general, I'll say some ombudsman support. So it's anonymous guidance that can help navigate through the program, or when you run into trouble, can help try to manage conflicts. We run weekly seminars or workshops on many different topics. We just finished a couple on tax returns. We've run, every semester, we've run a couple of workshops on relationship building. And we talk about the dissertation submission process. So every week there's something offered here. And I think you'll find over time, more and more schools are doing this kind of thing, but when you're looking for a school, look to see what other ancillary programs either your academic school or department or the graduate school offers you. You never know when you'll need it. You never know when you might need help looking for a place to live. It sometimes happens, or other issues.
You can certainly find much of that information on the web, but again, back to the idea of visiting campus, you really get a sense of the people and the support that you're going to have when you visit. So whether you visit as a prospective student or you visit once you're accepted and invited by the department, we definitely both encourage you to do that. So I don't see any existing questions, but I'd like to open it up to questions before we, have Dr. Dunn kind of wrap up with some final advice. So we'll take a moment. Are there any other questions from the folks who are on today? So I see Jacob is typing, which is great. While Jacob is typing a question, and there are multiple folks, we did talk a little bit about the profile of a student, and I said it's really important to know whether you'd be competitive or maybe are less competitive before you start talking to the faculty. Just some factual information, kind of average scores for us. The admitted students have an average GPA of about 3.3 here. This is last year's admitted class. Verbal GRE score of 159, quantitative of 163, and an analytical of just over 4.0. So again, it gives you an idea of students that say, wow, your verbal score is pretty high. And it is. I mean, we want to make sure that you're well positioned to do well in graduate school, and certainly your analytical and your writing skills are very much a part of that, whether you're in the STEM fields or in a different area.
No, that's very true. If you're even in science or engineering, and whether you go into industry or whether you're In academia, a large part of what you're going to do is communicate. You're going to write, and if you're in academia, there's lecturing and working with students. So we're looking for students that are well prepared. It doesn't, but even if you have a deficiency, we're still looking for those that are likely to succeed. I think we have a question.
All right, from Dominic, when it comes to GPA, do graduate admissions look at your overall, your BA degree classes, or the classes that are most important to the degree you will be pursuing on the graduate level? Good question.
Yeah. Good question. I would say if your GPA is high, it doesn't matter, right? If you're around a 3 or a little bit lower, there are many things that we look at. We will look at your major. If you do better in your major than your, say, elective courses. Sometimes students don't do well their first year because they're adjusting in their freshman year. And if your GPA is increasing from your freshman year through the senior year, then that's an indication of that you're prepared, or you're well prepared. Sometimes students have bad semesters. We've had students who get sick, shows up, and they often, when asked, or they do contribute, are very honest about reasons. But who was asking? It was Dominic. Dominic, yes. We don't just look at the GPA by itself. We do look at the overall transcript.
Francois is through any way to go through the PhD process in, sorry, I just lost it there.
I guess, is there any way to go through the PhD process for 4.5 years? Well, Francois, it depends on the program. You see, in the United States, ours are based largely on coursework, academics. And I think it's hard to get through it. Students could get through it in 4 years or less. It depends on the requirements of your program. If they don't require lots of coursework, yes, it's possible. If you went to Europe, where there's little or no coursework requirements, then absolutely it's possible. And I guess I would say here at Rensselaer, where we have general university requirements, that means you have to have a candidacy exam, you have to have a committee, you have to have a dissertation, and you have to defend it successfully. Beyond that, it doesn't much matter. Many of our programs do have course requirements. Some have fewer requirements. And if you don't have course requirements, then it's entirely possible, because for us, if you're a full-time student, you've got 12 credits a semester, 24 a year. In 3 years, you'd have 72 credits, which is what's required for the PhD. So if you have research only, if you're in a research only program, yes, 4.5 years is possible. But you have to get lucky. Get the right research problem.
All right, I see Jacob is typing a question, and we've got a couple of others coming through. Give that a quick moment. Thank you all for being on today's webinar. I know that some folks have come in late or had to leave early. We will be posting the entire webinar to you, so you get a chance to take a look. That's okay, Jacob. No worries. It's it's hard to do this and to type and to come up with what you want to ask. While we're waiting on some other questions, any advice or any folks on this call? As we said, they're from Bowie State, Pepperdine, so we've got people that would be relocating across country. Not sure where Francois is from, but interests here are in biochem, biophysics, chemical engineering, biology. So any thoughts, any advice?
Well, some specifics in general. I mean, it sounds like these are all schools that I'm familiar with, so they're all very good places. And thank you for being here today and your interest. I guess there's some, some general things. This is a long process. A PhD is a long process. And, I hope you'll all understand the phrase, but something that we always, when we talk to prospective students or students in a program who are unsure about what they want to do, we'll tell them, to get through successfully, you don't necessarily have to be at the top of your class. You don't necessarily have to come in with research schools. You have to have what I'll call a fire in the belly. You have to want it. You have to really want it. And if you really want it and you work hard, then I think, anybody can master the research skills. Anybody, can develop this problem-solving, ability. If you get the right mentor, he can help you or she can help you along. But ultimately, what makes it sometimes is tenacity, right? It's the fire in the belly. And because there will be sometimes when things will go wrong. I had a roommate who was in physics, experimental physics, and he studied what was called gravity waves, if you can believe that, if there is such a thing. And to measure gravity waves, you have to get near 0 degrees Kelvin. So you have to cool down this antenna. And he could never get there. But he tried for 10 years.
That's tenacity.
Right? That's tenacity. Yeah. So it varies from field to field, depending on what you're doing. If you're interested in life sciences, as a number of you are, this is a darn good place. There's a lot of history here in both chemical engineering and biomedical engineering, the life sciences, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, biophysics. A lot of strong opportunities. They all work together in our biotechnology center. So there's, regardless of what program you come into, there's going to be a lot of cross-fertilization. It's a small campus here. And so there's plenty of opportunity to work with people in departments you never thought you would. And you'll run into people, you have an opportunity to discuss multi or interdisciplinary subjects. When you're also looking for a school, pick a place where you like the environment, because although people will tell you you have to spend all your time in the lab, do not spend every waking hour in your laboratory in a classroom. Get out. Maintain balance in your life. So. Enjoy the experience. I think we have a couple of other.
Sure. So Dominic asks, I have another question about master's to PhD. I want to get my PhD in biophysics and interested in places such as Caltech here and UC Santa Barbara, but I'm also interested in master's biochemical engineering at the University of Tokyo. Which should I focus on first, the PhD or the master's?
I would say the PhD. That would be my recommendation. I think you'll get the master's along the way. Any of those PhD programs will also have a master's degree. And I think Dominic, there are probably other ways of getting experience overseas. I think thinking about Tokyo or going overseas is a great idea, but if you're in a program at a school in the United States, I'm sure that you can create an opportunity with your advisor to spend a summer or a semester overseas. If you go to Caltech or Santa Barbara, they may have IGRT programs, NSF fellowship programs where you may be asked to spend time overseas. So I would think of the end goal in mind, the PhD. Make sure you get overseas sometime.
Jacob, so if research is cross-disciplinary, how are qualifying exams administered? In other words, are students expected to first obtain an equivalent education in both fields of interest?
No. Actually, that's very good. If you have, most schools have a cross or multidisciplinary program where you would identify the committee, and then the committee writes the exam from each of their subject areas. So you're not expected, or you wouldn't be expected to get a complete education in each area, excuse me, but you would be expected to get enough background that you could pass what they think is a mastery level, exam. But it's customized. Customized.
I think that's the key point. Let's see, Dominic, thank you. I know of a foreign exchange program also, so that helps a lot. Yeah,
Right.
I think that's right. I think that's, having the end goal in mind and having some goals in the interim, and then figuring out, where are those intern opportunities that still allow you to move forward with the end goal.
If I may add, Dominic, one thing to think about would be the Fulbright program. And now there's two. There's a Fulbright English teaching, which wouldn't suggest that you do, but a research. And we've had many students here who will apply to the Fulbright program. If they're successful, they'll spend a semester or a year overseas at another research lab or university where they'll work on their dissertation research but maintain contact with their advisor back home. And that's a way of getting that overseas experience. Now, if you do decide to come to Rensselaer, we have somebody in the office. A fellowship person would help you prepare the application. And we can't guarantee success, but we can guarantee that there's somebody here to help.
Thinking a little bit about, we wait for other questions to come in about the external funding. So for folks on today's webinar that are juniors, and I believe there are some, it's a good time to really start looking at this external funding, because sometimes those application deadlines are actually earlier than the deadlines for admission. And this is pretty powerful money. First of all, it tends to be more robust than some schools offer in terms of their packages. But moreover, it's portable money. It's money that you can use for your graduate study, regardless of what institution you go to. So again, we're very fortunate here to have someone as a part of your team that works directly with students. But I encourage you at your home institutions to look for that similar person. Jacob has another question. I'm sorry, let me go to Dominic first. Heard of the Fulbright program, just trying to get everything lined up correctly. Good to know you're on the right path. Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Another question regarding interdisciplinary work. What determines which department are responsible for funding the student?
Well, I wouldn't, Jacob, I wouldn't say it's a department, but it would be an individual faculty member. The person who would serve as the chair of your committee or your advisor. He or she would be the person who would be largely responsible. Now, it may be the case that during part of your program, you may have the opportunity to serve as a teaching assistant, and that would probably be in a department where you have the most expertise or related expertise. For example, here at Rensselaer, there are many engineering students who serve as TAs in the math department, or students in biomedical engineering who serve as TAs in biology. Even some from the business school, TA in the math department. So it can change, and I'd say engineering students, TA in physics as well. But ultimately, whether you're in a single discipline or a multidisciplinary program, your advisor is the person who would really be responsible for lining up your support.
Wanted to go back while we wait for another question to come in to something that you said earlier about this fire in the belly idea. And I've seen students who have fire in the belly and write essays that are very lengthy and very extensive and very heartfelt, but they sometimes are all over here and don't necessarily get to why graduate school. Do you know the type of essay that I'm talking about? So I think my point here is, yes, the fire in the belly is really important. It is really important to have your faculty members at your current institution read that essay, or actually read as many parts of your application as possible to make sure that that fire in the belly is coming through in a way that's going to be received by the faculty as exactly what Dr. Dunn is talking about. So he is absolutely right, but I just encourage you to make sure that you have faculty at your home institution read, because they know exactly what the faculty members at Rensselaer or any other school are looking for in terms of that. candidates?
Yeah, a statement of background or goals, or or whatever it is, isn't an English essay.
Well
Right?
said. Yeah.
So it's not it's not something with a lot of flowery language. This isn't Hemingway or Poe or whatever, right? Yeah. But this is a statement that says, I want to do this. I want, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do to the best of your ability. That you know. And then why? Why do you want to get there? What in your background led you, to this place? If you're in the life sciences, sometimes we see statements where students say, well, they had a traumatic event in their background, a parent or a family member had an illness, and so that's directed them. But that still drove them.
That still drove them, right?
And so that's important. Or many other things, but we're looking for that direction, the fire in the belly.
That's right, the direction being a really key part. Francois, you talked about going overseas to gain additional research. Is it also an option to work with an overseas company rather than a university if the company did similar things to what you were researching?
Well, it depends on what relationship that work has to your dissertation, right? Because at one hand, I'll give you two cases. Let's say that the product is not really related, but you're going to learn some skills. You might be going to learn how to use a microscope or or a particular instrument or something, and that would be fine. But if you're working on a project in a company that is closely related to your dissertation work, then you might run into a problem of intellectual property. And that's not a place where I want anybody to be, right? Because your dissertation can be held up, or there could be, subject to lawsuits. And if you do pursue it, Francois, then what I would, suggest is get this all worked out in advance. Speak to your advisor. Speak to your office of technology commercialization. Make sure that the intellectual property agreements are in place. The company that you would be going to work with may also have their own agreements. They may say that if you're working there, they own the intellectual property. But then if it's part of your dissertation, you have to make sure, again, with the graduate school and with the lawyers that you can do that.
So looking at the time, it looks like we're about time to wrap up. So if you have any last minute questions, please feel free to get those in. I'm going to kind of give my summary and then have Dr. Dunn give a summary. So in this conversation, what I heard a lot about was developing relationships. That's a key to success. Both, preparing your application, but all the way through, quite honestly. I think good advice about if you want to get to know a program, school, department, and whether that's a good fit, talk to students who are currently there. And that can be done a lot of ways. Our office can be helpful in that. Certainly, the faculty connections that you have can be helpful in getting to the student level. We have a visitation program for prospective students where we actually set up, as part of a one-day visit, a customized visit, opportunities for you to, for example, have lunch with current students. So again, once you've narrowed down your possible list of institutions, figure out how to get yourself there, hopefully in person, and if not, certainly through something like this. It's a good thing you're considering, graduate school. I think you're going to wind up talking to people who will tell you that you're specializing yourself, you're creating a niche, and that sometimes they'll say you know a lot about nothing, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And I'd like you to think about it the way we've talked about it today. And at least the way I see it, is this is a test of your independence, so that when you go out to get a job, a prospective employer will say,
You know, that master's degree or that PhD demonstrates that this person can be independent and that he's not just going to be a line engineer, but this person can be a project manager because they've demonstrated in their degree program. Or a doctoral candidate might go out and interview for a job and say this person could fit in a research and development laboratory because they know how to work independently. You're less worried about that. Or if you go to pursue an academic career. And we haven't even talked about other alternatives, which we won't do today. But suffice it to say that a graduate degree doesn't over-specialize you. A graduate degree really creates more opportunities for you than you had before. And that's because it's this training in being independent. You'll have many more opportunities. You could go to industry, you could go to academia, you could go into science writing. There's many other things that you could decide to pursue. So it's a great time in your life, and it's a great time to dream and soak up what you can at your undergraduate institutions, and start to gather information and think about graduate programs, and then just set off down this path where at the other end you just you may have so many opportunities you won't know what to do. I think we have maybe one last question.
Yeah, I think my hope is that through this we've lit your desire to look at the PhD programs and pursue them. So Dominic's final question is, what is a reasonable number of schools to apply to? I currently have a list of 8 that I'm considering.
Dominic, I think that's a good list.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, you don't want to bank all in one. Create, I think a list of 8 is good. I think I applied to 6, the first time through. So, and then, if you're going to get different offers and compare, different offers. And I think it sounds like you're set.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd say anywhere from probably 5 to 8 is pretty typical. With that, it reminds me that if you are looking at Rensselaer, we will waive the application fee for participating in these types of events, and it can get expensive to apply to 8 schools. So, think about it. Sometimes schools will give opportunities like this if you attend, and it's a great way to get to know the school. You know a little bit more about Dr. Dunn's philosophy as the Dean of Graduate Education, and a little more about the admissions process. So we encourage you to do similar types of activities at other schools. With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for attending today. As I said, we'll be sending out the webinar. And all right, Dominic, excellent. Glad it worked. Thank you so much for attending today. And if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them. My colleagues Tracy